myself, I will kind of go into where I kind of like why my mind has kind of gone to this. But is there anyone else that has anything else to say in regards to the actual question itself?
I would say that just with the way society is, it's like very like this is a man's world for sure, and like patriarchy reigns supreme, etc. So I and because a lot of the like laws of the land come from a biblical kind of standpoint, I
Yeah.
believe. I found it. I thought, yeah, I was just a bit intrigued by the topic because I in my opinion, I wouldn't see. I'm like scrambling my brain. I'm trying to understand where it would challenge masculinity. So I'm excited to hear what you've got to say.
Cool. So, I'll kind of give you my little background in terms of why I started thinking about this, and then also when we after we actually put it up, and in my preparation for it, um, the research that I did and how surprised I was, and actually told me today about how surprised I was about the research around this. So I have kind of been looking around, and I think I've witnessed similar things to Lewis in terms of there doesn't seem to be as many men in the church. In terms of as a youth leader, as a youth assistant, and as youth leaders, I think we can see that essentially there aren't that many guys. It's really difficult to get them to come to meetings. It's difficult. Yeah, it's difficult to get the girls as well. But there's always a way to get the girls somehow. Like you could kind of like, if you talk to them enough, if you ask them specifically, oh please come. Eventually we'll get the girls to get in the room. But with the boys, it's a lot more difficult. And it's not everyone. That is definitely a generalization. But in terms of just sitting in the pews, and if you look around you, the amount of young men in the church isn't really there. So, okay, and I've just seen Pastor Thomas has literally just put a stat saying the stats show that 70% of the Adventist church are women. So that's like massive. That's ridiculous, to be honest. So if we then look into the kind of research that I did, just kind of reading around this, I had never once Googled why are men leaving the church. Literally every single article that comes up is every single article that comes up is around the feminization of the church, or the feminization of Christianity, which blew my mind because I thought it was just some little theory I had in my head. Like when I'm talking to guys, I'm asking them, "Oh, why aren't you coming to church?" Da, da, da. They're like, "Oh, well, I don't really feel like it relates to me." And then we start talking about like what Christianity asks you to do as a man and blah blah. And it tends to come up as it actually clashes with what their version of masculinity is in their head. I don't know if I'm just sort of rambling, but from what I've said so far, is that something that you guys agree with? Is that completely like, Jewel, that makes absolutely no sense? What you're going on about? What are your initial thoughts?
I think that it's important to define what masculinity is. I think that when I was thinking about this topic, I was struggling to actually like I know what it is for me personally, like what I define it to be, but
Mm,
then trying to think of a general definition that can be applied to all men. I think
mm-hmm.
that that's when it became a bit difficult, and then I actually tried to break it down, and I was like, masculinity actually, it's not, when you talk about it, I feel like it's not spoken about in a positive light.
Mm,
Like or when you think about it, it's usually more of like toxic masculinity. Men should be this, men shouldn't be that, and
mm.
in that quite restrictive sense. So I feel like maybe by exploring what
What
masculinity
masculinity is?
means to different people, that might be a good place to start.
100%, it would be. So let's start that then. And I'd like to hear from the men, because another thing that's been literally noticed to me is that in terms of people speaking, it's mostly been women, which again is kind of like, okay, why is that? So can we have a guy, a man, anyone give us their definition of what they think masculinity is in today's modern society? None of the men want to speak.
You know what? Let me talk then.
Go on then, Alex.
I think what it means to be a man in today's society is, first of all, not to have emotional or not to be emotional.
Oh.
You see where I'm coming from? It's like we're not allowed to feel what we really feel. So it's like, you know, especially as men growing up, we're told by our fathers and our friends, you know, why are you crying? Don't cry. You know, men don't cry, etc. And this is something that is instilled in us as we grow up. So it's hard to be able to show our vulnerable sides without the fear of being judged. You see where I'm coming from? So I feel like from society's point of view, it means you have to be like a wall without any emotion, without anything. So therefore, I feel like as men, we suffer in silence growing up. So yeah, that's my view.
Okay, wow. Okay. Is there like anything else in terms of someone's definition of masculinity? One that might be maybe positive. Yeah. Hello? Okay, so I've got in the chat says, has the world misconstrued masculinity, and that has made the church unappealing as God presents different versions of masculinity? Interesting. So like if we're to define like a worldly sense on masculinity, what would that be? I do need contributions, guys. Otherwise, just gonna listen to me talk.
I'm just looking on the definition of masculinity on Google. Yeah. It says qualities or attributes regarded as characteristics of men. So handsome, muscled, and driven. He's prime is a prime example of masculinity.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I don't know if that gives anyone's minds or like sparks any ideas, but I'll meet.
So like, if I was to say like, if I was to think, okay, I feel like a lot of the time masculinity can be associated with what women also deem to be masculine, because if I look at someone in a certain way and I think that they are masculine, they could be, in comparison to everyone else, maybe they're not alpha, I don't know what the heck that means, they're not an alpha male, but for me, if they're masculine, then in my heart and mind, they're masculine. Do you know what I mean? So there can be that, but in terms of just like your general like masculinity, like what you said as them being driven, being determined, accomplishing things, being strong, like all of this kind of stuff, I feel like we would associate with what a man would strive to be, right? Cool. So in terms of that, in terms of being strong, being driven, being someone that people can rely on, all of this kind of stuff, how then I think Mercedes asked the question earlier, how then does that mean that Christianity essentially could challenge that? So this is my argument, okay, and I'm going to kind of put it out to you. I think that the reason why Christianity challenges masculinity is because Christianity asks you to be vulnerable. Christianity asks you to recognize your weakness and find strength. Christianity suggests that you are nothing and you need to find yourself. The only way that you'll be able to find yourself is in God. The only way that you're going to be able to achieve is in God. While society tells men that they need to be strong, they aren't supposed to show weakness and vulnerability. If you show vulnerability, that someone's going to be able to find your weak spot and take you down, all that kind of stuff. And I don't necessarily think that Christianity as a whole will never promote those things in men, but I feel like the way that it's packaged today in terms of how we preach, we don't preach about like Jesus being like a superhero that's come to earth to save us, and this is our soldier, and like we don't talk about it in that kind of masculine way. Rather, Jesus is as our husband that came to save the world, and he like we are his bride, and all the gospel music almost sounds like love songs, and like to some extent it could be seen as being feminized. So I'm just kind of wondering if there's anything that we can do about this, if it's fine the way it is, or if there's some sort of middle ground. That's my question. Is it fine the way it is? Like, is that just Christianity? Is that the way it should be? And men need to kind of like adjust to that and be more vulnerable and be more open and like that sort of thing. Okay. Can I just ask the question? Are most people gonna type and not talk? Because I'm getting a lot in the chat, and if that's the thing, okay, Tom, please speak.
I was trying my best not to speak because last week I feel like I spoke too much. But my 2 pence is this: I think that what you're saying is correct. There is the articulational language in church is very feminized. I was talking to Gustav about this yesterday, that a lot of the songs we sing in church is almost like a girlfriend singing to her boyfriend, which is uncomfortable. The idea that we are the bride and Jesus is our husband is uncomfortable language if we're trying to talk about masculinity that can add to the feminization of the environment. But I don't really think that's the heart of the problem. I think the heart of the problem is a more society-wide one, which is that there isn't consensus on a definition of masculinity. So it's not so much about the lack of definitions, it's more that there isn't a consensus. And therefore nobody knows what they're doing. Nobody knows what role they're supposed to play within society, especially when it comes to displaying positive masculinity. So there's been a massive emphasis over the last 10 years on toxic masculinity. Everybody knows that. But no one has really emphasized positive masculinity. So it's like a football team where every position doesn't know what it's supposed to do. Everybody wants to be a striker. Everybody wants to be a defender. Everybody wants to be in midfield. And there is there's become like a regression towards anybody wanting to define specifically what each gender is supposed to be doing. And that's then filtered into church, because I think in church there isn't, for better or worse, back in the day there used to be clear definitions around roles in church, and so everybody was comfortable and understood what they were doing there. Whereas now I think those lines have been blurred, and so there isn't any definition of what people are supposed to be doing there as it pertains to gender, and therefore that affects masculinity. So it's more society has affected what's happening in church, because we are part of society. And then the language of the the feminine language in church is also another contributing factor, as you mentioned.
I think one thing that's really interesting, and I might be making quite a controversial point, so anyone feel free to kind of jump in and be like, no, Jewel. But I think the increase of women being able to do things and be in certain positions and just in general being a little bit more empowered, a lot more empowered than we were before, has actually shaken the kind of space for men. So we're now in a space where men are now trying to figure out, if women can do all of these things, what does that make me? Like, where is my place now? Is that a thing?
I think, if I can just quickly mention, I think it's more that we've spent a lot of time defining that now, and not any time defining what the other bit is. So if you look at, for example, I think Pastor Thomas, I've raised this in the comments, if you look at what happened with the backlash from that Gillette advert, I think last year, there was a huge backlash driven by feminism around that advert, and not so much because of its content, but because Gillette had the audacity to define what masculinity could be in the advert, and that's what made everybody uncomfortable. And so there was a massive backlash at the idea that you could define masculinity as this one thing. And some of it was obviously borrowing from traditional masculinity aspects, that there was nothing wrong with it. Men shave, men do all these other different activities, and they kind of tried to create the message. But the backlash was around the definition, like the fact that you had the audacity to define masculinity in one way. And I think that's what society is fighting against right now, and it's affecting us in church.
Cool. Can I get Gilbert to speak very quickly? Sorry.
Yeah, hello. Sorry.
Oh, Uncle, you're breaking up a lot. Is there any way to kind of improve your internet?
What about now?
Hello?
Is it any better?
Yeah, much better.
Is it any better?
Yeah, much better. Please carry on.
Right. Yes, I was going to say, I think Thomas has covered quite a bit of what I was going to say. But I would also like to add on that I think quite a major onslaught on masculinity is coming from, should I say, the state as well. I mean, the legalities surrounding what men are capable of doing and what men are able to do. I mean, it has so much changed. And also, it's been mentioned that women have been more empowered now. Women are able to do a lot of things more for themselves than back in the day when men was more in the patriarchal society where men were more the provider and women more likely to be at home. So also, I mean, with all these issues arising, as I said, the legalities are not necessarily helping men. And then also,
can I ask you to
right, for
expand on
example,
what you think the legalities?
Okay, when I say the legalities, maybe let me say should I say the legal framework in a way, some things that I don't know, should I say some responsibilities that have been taken off men. For example, let me say when there is a custody battle over a child, what usually happens, rightfully so, is the fact that mother has full custody of the child. But that what then happens after that is maybe the father will have a right to see the child, but then the mom will decide, no, you can't see the child. And if the mom decides that you can't see the child, the state will go with what the mom is saying, or not necessarily so. The legal hurdles that you have to hop through to see that child actually, you know, emasculate you to a certain point. So those are some of the issues involved. And then also sometimes because women are now empowered, some are able to then, I mean, I think their challenge might come round as negative, not necessarily positive. You know, there's a certain way sometimes where we need to encourage one another, but sometimes we're not doing that because you're now empowered, you feel independent. You don't care maybe sometimes what you're going to say to the next person. So all those issues, as far as I'm concerned, do have an effect also on what masculinity, I mean, how men are feeling and how men are feeling treated, apart from all the other host of issues that are available in the society today.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Can I have Lois speak, please? And then I'm going to refer back to the chat, okay?
Hi, I agree with most things that most people are saying, but I think if you look at the church, the church has predominantly women, 70% women, and it's been that way for a long time. Growing up as a child, 44, growing up as a child, it was still predominantly women. When I look at the boys that have left church, predominantly their fathers weren't in church, and so the role models that they're looking.
Oh, Lois, I don't know why you've muted me. Okay, no, you're fine now.
Oh, sorry. And then if you look at society as a whole now, society is trying its best to move away from this masculine and feminine, and it's all, oh, we're just, there's no gender, and we're putting people in emphasis anymore. And I honestly believe that is a ploy of the devil. The devil's attacking men. End of story. And in every time that the devil has tried to attack society, he started with the men. From Moses to this time, it's always started with the men, because you eliminate the men in society, and unfortunately stuff does break down. I have a son. As good as a mum as I think I am, I can't be his father. It's important that he has a role model there. So we have a lot of young men growing up without fathers, growing up without positive role models, not seeing those positive role models in church, and that is affecting them and their church attendance also.
Yeah, like I think in one of the articles that I was reading, they were saying that you see a lot of like young mothers getting their kids out of the car, running to church with their children, with their sons, but the father isn't necessarily there. And that in itself, not having, or even if they are there, the reluctant man being there isn't the best either, because even if your dad is in church sitting in the pew next to your mum, if you know that he was grumbling the whole way, that your mum had to really shake him to get out of bed in the morning, that it's more like your mum pushing you out of the house, and your father is the representative of like what you deem to be a man, what you think is like a masculine figure in your life, there's definitely going to be an issue there in terms of like connecting that to Christianity 100%. I'm just going to go to the chat really quickly. There's a lot going on here. That was okay. So to summarize a lot of it, so Sasha, I think a lot of the conversations out there, I think that it comes to a social construction of what masculinity is. Everyone's perception and experience will be different. And I think that's 100% true, is that like kind of, I personally think it's more so that it evolves over time. Like what we may have deemed as masculine 10 years ago might not necessarily be deemed as masculine now, because there has been that kind of change. In terms of like Christianity, I think there was a time where being like a good, like God-fearing man was also part of being as a masculine thing. If you disagree with what I'm saying, please speak. I'm begging you.
Hello?
Oh,
yeah.
Should I go?
Anyone.
Okay. So I think I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, yes, God-fearing man. That is like the epitome of masculinity for some reason. But my question is, like, when Adam and Eve were created, like, so this is before sin now.
Yeah.
What was the definition of masculinity then? Because for me, and of course anybody could jump in, masculine was described as a man, somebody with who looks like a man and probably had male genitalia, sorry guys, and then a woman the same. Like, it's physical. For me it was physical. For me, I never saw anything in the Bible that said Adam was masculine because he did this and Eve was masculine because she did that. It's only after sin then you see like God put in like, this is your responsibility now, this is your responsibility now. But then when it comes to characteristics, I think, okay, we're talking about God-fearing man, but those are the same things that God requires from a woman. When it comes to character, what is the difference? Because I feel like everyone should be on the same playing field. So I feel like we're still coming back to the question, what is it actually? And then how does it actually pertain to like attendance in the church? Because if it's about things being more emotive, then wouldn't you say that we're all called to be people who have emotional intelligence? So then is masculinity a thing that we should be holding, and even femininity, so it can go both ways? So this is something that we should be holding in such high regard? That's my question.
No, definitely. I think that's definitely something to think about. And can we just come back to that? I thought I could just run through the chat really quickly. But keep it in mind because I'm going to ask you to repeat it. So Sam said, I don't think you can come up with a definition, basically, because potentially your life experiences should mold you to the man you are. Gus also agreed that he doesn't think that you can. Pastor Thomas said, is masculinity really a social construct or part of biologically being male? And then Sasha says, I think the definition of the definition is a social construct, which most people have agreed with. Samantha says social, because even biologically, men will differ in terms of physical strength, etc. So there will be a variation when you break it down to biology alone, and some would still be classed as more manly than others. So yes, the definition is a social construct as a result of ideology that gender is separate from biology. But what defines more manly? What the Gus says, what does God require from man that he doesn't require from women, which is similar to what Abigail was saying. Maybe the answer lies there of what masculinity is. I think experience is different from biology. It's nature versus nurture. Marcy says that's changing now. They have now discovered that children need fathers and the system is trying their best. Okay, this was in regards to Gilbert's point, I believe, that is changing now, that they now discovered that children need fathers and the system tries their best to not separate them from their father unless the father is deemed unfit. now they're more likely to have 50% custody. Praise said, why does women being empowered threaten masculinity? Wow, there's a lot. 13, okay, there's a lot. Like 30, I'm going to be reading for ages. But there seems to be a massive discussion around, what masculinity is. And I think at this point, we can kind of say it's going to be really difficult to define what exactly that is. But I think when we think of like a typical masculine man, I think we all have like that idea in our head. Am I wrong?
Hi,
Can
I'm
I come in?
Sasha.
Yeah, go on, Sasha.
I think that, like you say, if we think about a man or a God-fearing man, whatever label you want to put on it, we're all going to have a different picture of what that looks like, and what those characteristics may be. But I agree with Abigail in the sense that characteristics are very different and align with both what females should be and males in God's eyes. And so my point is that we shouldn't really downplay what someone's views as masculinity and what another person does. I think that what we need to do is look inward to if you are a male, to look at, well, are you happy with your own masculinity? And if not, why is that? And what does that look like? And does it align with what the Bible says about the role of a male, the role of a Christian, etc. But in order to identify what masculinity is, if I ask myself and I write down what that looks like, and Abigail does, and Tom does, and I think Alex does, we'll all have something that is, we may have overlap, but overall it's probably going to be very different.
Yeah, 100%. I think from like a Christian perspective, what I've always done until someone like completely derailed the whole virtuous women thing for me, was the bit in Proverbs 31, the words of King Lemuel's mother, where she kind of asked him, like, it's giving him instructions as to how to like be a good king or whatever. And basically says that he like shouldn't drink strong drink, he shouldn't give his strength to women, he should open his mouth with the speechless, he should basically like stand up for people, be a just and like right person. Like I would say that that would be like, okay, maybe that's like the Bible's definition of a man, which is like great, but I'm sure like girls are supposed to also be like that as well. Like I'm sure we're also meant to like stand up for people and like, but I don't know, maybe it's a thing where like I don't know whether there is a biblical like definition of what it means to be masculine, apart from like when you look at it from like a marriage point of view, which was last week's discussion of like, which still is just telling you like love your wife, like, and like if you go back to Genesis, like, oh, till the ground. So I don't know, like, but let's go to the hands that are up. So we have Moy.
Oh yeah, I wanted to say I agree with what Lois previously said, and I want to echo that there is a reason why, I think there's a reason why there are fewer men in church, and there is a reason why feminism, especially bad feminism, is on the rise, and masculinity is being put down, right? You have to understand that there is a difference between men and women, and that difference goes way back into Genesis before sin. And you see a difference between men and women. For example, God created Adam first. Why? God spoke to Adam and told him, do not eat from this tree. By the way, he did not tell Eve, God did not speak to Eve that do not eat from the tree. He only spoke to Adam, and then Adam spoke to Eve. Eve got it from Adam. Why did God do that? Eve came from Adam. Why is that, right? God told Adam, you're the one who's supposed to be working in the field. Why is that? You see that there is a difference, right? And then if you jump into the New Testament after sin, Paul then says, the man is the head of the house. Why is that? The devil knows if he attacks the head, everything falls. The whole body is gone. So there is the devil knows is intentionally attacking men so that he gets the whole society. That's why usually I was reading statistics that children that are raised in single parent homes, especially raised by just fathers, they are more likely to go into prison. Why is that? He's not saying that women are bad, but the devil knows that there is something that men have, that God put in men, that women don't have. And I wanted to finish off with this statement in Second Manuscripts, 1911. Ellen White writes this: Satan chooses women, for he can use them more successfully than he can men. The devil knows that if I can get to that man, that's why he got to Adam through Eve, through his woman. And it was only when Adam ate from the tree that the whole world was lost to Satan. So the world right now is trying to put men and women exactly the same in every single aspect. Yes, we're all equal, but there is something that men have, that God put in men. That's why when God comes from in the second coming, he's going to be asking husbands and men, what have you done with the families that I gave you? You had the greatest responsibility. That's my comment.
Yeah, I think that that's a very interesting perspective. And yeah, like with Lois saying, I think this is something that has been said for a long time now, that that people feel like the devil is attacking men, and if things do become overly feminized, and the boys that you're bringing to church, they don't have like their mentors, which is something that's being brought up in the YouTube comments actually. That I think Ferez was saying it, that there isn't enough like male mentorship in the church. So if essentially we don't have those male representatives to basically man up the message, we are going to have these like overly feminized messages, these overly emotional ways of communicating things, which essentially doesn't appeal to a wide audience of men, like Tom was saying earlier. And I'm actually going to give Tom the stage to speak now. Tom.
I guess I'm still trying to grapple with the idea of where we're going to get a definition from, because when I read the Bible, I see various definitions that are implied, but are all steeped in the culture of the time. Yeah. So as time moves on, the cultures are going to change, and therefore, do we then say the culture of the time informs the masculinity? Maybe. Do we if we then say that, we have to then come back to our own culture here in Western Europe and the society here, who is trying to move away from definitions and homogenize all the genders and make us all one thing. Do we then go down that road? But then to answer the question of if there were more men in church to make it more masculine space, what kind of masculinity would they be passing on? Because if they came into church and told all the young boys, be the man of the house, be the head, you are the head, and so on and so forth, judging from last week's conversation, half of you ladies will be spending half your time offended and annoyed. So even if there were more men in church, would that make you guys happy? Not really. Would it make men more suited to operate in this world? Not really again. So I'm still trying to get my head around conceptually, where do we get these definitions from? Because we have to agree that first in order for it to have credence when we finally define it. Because the African, depending on how close they are to their African identity, will have a very specific sense of what masculinity is supposed to be: a provider. My word is final. I bring in the money. If we have kids, I'm the one who go out to work. You will quit your job in order to look after the kid. There's very defined roles. And even I remember when we first came to this country, and the economic reality hit our parents' generation, and all of them had to work. That was a very difficult transition for a lot of men to go through, because they couldn't be the only ones providing money for the house. That's not, the economics of this country wouldn't allow that to happen. So their masculinity had to adapt and change depending on the environment that they were in. So how do we figure this out conceptually? Because we can't just be one kind of masculine and travel all around the world with one kind of masculine. We're gonna perish.
In response to what you were saying earlier around if we had more men in the church and like more masculine things were being pushed and promoted and etc. I might just be speaking for myself. That wouldn't bother me. Like, in terms of telling men that they are the prophets of their homes. Because like, if in terms of, I have no problem with growing up, getting married or whatever, and my husband being the one to lead that family worship, and him making sure that my children have their prayer journals and that they're praying every night. And then you do that, that's great. I'll follow in your lead to do that. That's fantastic. I feel like that's, in terms of seeing.
Sorry,
seeing
can you say that? Can you say that again so I can record it?
Oh my gosh, what?
I'm joking.
Okay, I know everyone knows. Okay, Jill's a feminist. Okay, fine, but like, I still think that is a beautiful thing. I still think it's lovely for men to be able to have that kind of power in their homes from a spiritual point of view. And what's interesting to me is when we talk about men leading the family and blah blah, we don't actually tend to focus on what it actually says about being the prophet of your, like, being the prophet of your home, being the spiritual leader of your home. You want to lead in everything else, but your wife is still the one that calls family worship. I don't really get that. In terms of yeah, okay, you're the man of the house, lead it financially, lead here, lead there. But what the Bible actually calls you to do is to be the spiritual head of your home. You are responsible, and you will be called on if your children do not make it. So if like, that's where your actual responsibility as a man, like in my head anyway, as a man lies. In terms of like all this other stuff, in terms of feminism and masculinity, toxic masculinity, blah blah, I don't really think that kind of touches a man being the spiritual head of his home. But that's my take on what we have to say, Thomas. We have someone called Ivan. I hope I'm saying your name properly. I'm so bad at pronunciation. Ivan. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I joined in late, but I can still share my points about this according to my little research. Yeah, I think someone talked about the definition of masculinity over the years and how it's been changing. And we've been during our time right now, especially in this Western world we're in. It's a Western world whereby it's a movement of feminism where it's been more dominating than masculinity. And my point or my worry about this is that when there's a situation or when there's a problem, they solve it and create another problem. I don't know whether you get the point.
Not really. Please expand.
Like, let's say, for example, where men used to misbehave, mistreat women, and the whole solution to it is like, let's create an environment that men can't do it, but at the same time, let us make women more stronger than they were as an answer to it. And in the result, men become weak.
Why does women becoming strong mean men become weak?
Come again?
Why does women becoming strong mean men become weak?
Like, what I'm trying to explain on this is that how men, like their natural way of expression or their natural way of attitude of, looking at life. So it's no longer the case as it used to be. Like you have this kind of thing that what women, men and women, there are kinds of definitions where they say what women can do, men can do, but there is always that limit. There is always that distinction that differentiates a man and a woman. Even when you would give them different tasks altogether, there are things that will always be manly in a way.
You like physical things, like men being physically stronger.
Yeah,
so like you can pick up the box easier than I can pick up the box.
It can be physical stuff, because if you look at their brains are different. There are different things that are different about them, and there's one problem which people never see is that these two people, what I mean is the woman and man, they need to work in harmony. But right now, the world, how it's shaping it is like there are two people trying to rival against each other, and it's kind of getting into the church as well. whereby we're seeing, you know, men who are empowered and women who are empowered, and they're trying to be as if they are at war because of all these, you know, movements. So I think. So
the only reason I'm interrupting you is I'm wondering, in terms of, like, for example, in terms of you saying that men and women are also bashing each other in the church, personally, and I don't know if anyone else would agree, I don't really see that. Also, like, if you look at it from the Adventist church point of view, women still aren't even being ordained. So, like, in terms of like, in terms of encouraging men to be in leadership, I feel like we still do that. We still got, even though we've got less like male people sitting in seats, the eldership is still all male. Still have male pastors. Still have like male leaders in treasury and all these kind of things. We've got like feminine departments, which I'm going to come to in terms of why our men's department isn't as active as our women's department. Like, in terms of the children's department being mostly run by women, which I think is ridiculous. The pathfinder department, even though at the top level is run by men, in terms of the actual leaders are women, like things like that. That's where I don't see there seems to be an issue. I personally don't see it. Maybe you can give me some insight in terms of how the actual church, like women in the church, are causing men to feel like they don't have a space.
Truthfully, I believe the situation we find ourselves in right now has been a long time coming. And when I mean this situation, I mean one where it seems like the world is being turned upside down and men are, you know, obviously being kind of pushed out or pushed around or whatever. It's because, we've spent a lot of time, especially in the Western world, being in this seat of supremacy and really running a sort of a dictatorship and just not being fair and you know, doing things the right way with women, and that equality and, you know, that sort of thing. So just like when you have a population of people who are downtrodden and treated badly for a while, there comes a time when they reach a breaking point and rebel and revolution happens, you know. So I fully agree with the fact that this revolution had to happen and did happen, right? But it's a bit of a shame that the church, so why we find ourselves in the situation we're in right now particularly, is because the church is not necessarily being the voice that it should have been, where we have the Bible that says, you know, treat people fairly, treat your spouse, treat the woman, treat people in general just fairly as you would want to be treated yourself. We have not been that voice. We have not been the people driving that forward. We kind of somewhere we got stuck. You know, it takes us so long to understand slavery is wrong. It takes us so long to understand all sorts of other mistreatment of people, and the environment is wrong. So we're slow. We should be leading the pack. And if that was so, then we could have set the tone, just like the early Christians set the tone that it's good to be faithful to your wife. These were things that the early Christian church was known for, from the lot that they were amongst in the Roman Empire. Faithful to their wives, faithful to God, one God, you know, etc., etc., etc. But we have not pushed it on. We've kind of stopped. And I guess we got comfortable, especially the man. We got comfortable just being in this seat, in this place, and it was necessary for the revolution to happen. So that's why the movement then has been hijacked by people who've just got frustrated with the fact that we're absent, we're not contributing, we're not changing things anymore. So it's fallen into sort of secular hands per se, and then obviously that goes in all sorts of different directions because there's not a standard in that sector and that side, whereas we have a standard of God in the church or Jesus.
100.
I also wanted to say that, sorry, my name is Nancy.
Hi.
I just wanted to say that I think the problem really has come from allowing society to define what masculinity is for us and trying to adopt that definition in the church. I think initially we should have actually looked to the standard of what God expects from a man, so a person who is in that role. And I think historically, obviously there's this notion that men are leaders, and that also comes from God. But throughout history, people have abused this sort of position. And I think that's why it almost seems as though women have now come along and they've now been empowered, and it's almost like, you know, what's happening in the church. So in a way, it almost feels like the church has, I don't know, the definition of masculinity has sort of been pushed away. But I think being a real man is being a man who is a leader, a spiritual leader, a man who is also with authority, but is also humble, someone who shows kindness to people in the society. And I think what we should do as Christians is actually make a definition that would not be swayed by what happens in society, but a definition that is, I don't know, that looks to God as the standard. So yeah, that's what I was thinking anyway.
I also like to.
Yes, Nikki.
So like earlier on, people have been talking in the comments as well. And I think I agree with some people who have said that this is a very subjective, it's become such a subjective and time-changing thing, the concept of being masculine. And I think also masculinity has so many layers to it, like what you mentioned earlier, where there is a spiritual side to it, there is a cultural side to it, and then there is also the physical aspect of it. There's so many layers to it, and people choose and pick what suits them and what's applicable to them, and then go with that. Like coming from various backgrounds, I come from a Zimbabwean background where sometimes, depending on who you're talking to, the cultural aspect is more important than the religious aspect. The culture is heavily sedating on what it is to be a man, and then like what it is to be a godly man or a man who is the head of his house. In cultural aspects, it's so different. And at the bottom line is the man that is in question in terms of his masculinity, is he doing what is aligned with God's will? And that's I feel like that's the bit that we need to get back to, because if we as people, we like to put things in boxes because it works out easier for us to understand. If you can understand it and put it in a box, it's easier for you to deal with it. And then when somebody steps out of that box, it becomes uncomfortable for everyone. Like, why is that person, like, he's a man, but he's got feminine this and whatever. And we spend so much time debating on, you know, like maybe the physical aspects of it, or maybe the cultural aspects of it, that we lose the whole point of, like, that man is a man in God's eyes, and he has a purpose, and this is what is he doing what is in alignment to what God wants him to do and what he has to do for his family or the church. And I feel like that's what we need to get.
What I'm going to do right now, I'm going to run through the hands of people that have had their hands up, and then going to take us down a slightly different path, okay, in terms of what we're speaking on now. Okay, is that okay with everyone? Cool. So, Jonathan. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
So, greetings from Sweden.
Wow, all the way from Sweden, guys.
Yeah, a friend of mine who's lived in the UK saw this and said maybe I should have a listen. Mm-hmm. So, bringing a bit of an international perspective myself, being born and raised in Australia, lived in the US, Scandinavia, and of Polish heritage. So I've got a broad perspective.
Yeah.
It's a complex issue in terms of gender, and we know the whole modern society is pushing that gender is a choice. You can choose to be male, female, neutral, something in between, something different, and trying to do aside with basic biological differences in how we think and how we approach. we know the stereotype that when women generally like to talk things out, whereas men will not necessarily, we're more problem solvers rather than just talking things out. You know, that's that kind of a stereotype. But when we look at how Paul addressed the family structure, he said husbands should love their wives as Christ loved the church. And women should respect their husbands. And so Paul here he's addressing different needs that the different people have. Why shouldn't the wife love the husband just like the husband loves the wife? Because he's emphasizing there are different needs that they have. And to have love like Christ had to love the church, he was willing to die and sacrifice himself. And so that's a challenge we have with how society presents things, in that it sees sacrifice as weakness. And that's contrary to scripture, where willing to sacrifice for your family for what's most important is the greatest love that you can have. And that's a tough decision. That's a courageous decision, to put aside your own pride and ego for the betterment of the weaker people in your family. And an interesting paradox is that being in Scandinavia, where people like to promote it as being more equal than in many other countries, when people have a choice, it seems the data is showing that when women have a choice to stay home, they will stay at home to be more mothers and be more family minded when they have that option, because the welfare state is willing to support that. And so there are different motivations and important priorities for different people. The challenge that we face in the church, some of the things you've alluded to, is where are the services within the church, for example, for men? 100%. And this is a challenge we face in general in society, that we don't, especially in the Christian community, we don't have any tradition where people actually are acknowledged that they're an adult, and we have this concept of being forever young. We always want to be a teenager, youthful, and so on, and never actually acknowledge that you're an adult to take on responsibility. And even some agencies like the UN and government agencies say that you're a youth up to the age of 35. And it's like, are you serious? You've left home at 18 and you still considered a youth and an indolent, and kind of, you still need to learn. And so there's no acknowledgement of responsibility, like the Jewish community has the bar mitzvah for boys and for girls, to transition from childhood into adulthood, regardless of whether you see yourself as male or female, to actually have the community acknowledge you as an adult to take on responsibility, because that's the key aspect of adulthood, which we don't address even in our own community. And a short story on that, a friend of mine who was a missionary in Benin, they did a documentary on the successful missionary work there, but one of the people who grew up in the former pagan culture and became an Adventist then talked about the weakness of the new generation, which was raised in the Christian church, seeing them as weak because they didn't have these kind of traditions that had them transitioning into adulthood. And with that kind of a weakness in our society, you have other people like Dr. Neil Nedley talking about the issues of pornography, where we don't have an open forum about that in our community, and men don't necessarily feel comfortable about talking about such things and weaknesses in front of women. But that when you take away any way of people to be recognized as a man, for example, look at the sick things that's going on in pornography, where people are acting out their masculinity and then repeating that in society. And so we can see this toxic masculinity is driving things like the pornography industry and shaping how people perceive masculinity and sexuality and other things. So you can see it touches on all sorts of aspects, how we perceive roles and responsibilities.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I can understand that. Yeah, thank you for your contribution, Rosie. I think that gives us a lot to think about. I've seen you, Raymond. Don't know. Hello.
Was it my time?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. No, I just had a question and a few contributions as well. So yesterday I was in a group chat with my friends, and the question came up, and it was saying, let me just read it out to you. The question was, can a single dad teach his daughter how to be a woman? And his answer was no. And a woman responded saying, becoming a woman is kind, inevitable. What do you think being a woman entails that being a decent human doesn't? And going off the masculinity, can a woman teach her son masculinity, or does it just boil down to being a good human? So that's the question.
That's an excellent question. In terms, I do think in society, in terms of being a girl and being a boy, I think being taught that is very, very difficult. In terms of, I feel like it's a lot easier to be like, girls, like, I don't even know what you have to teach a girl, like, just be a good person, like, it's all right, sort of thing. But I feel like with guys, there are certain things that people want to instill in their sons, because there's so many things coming at boys. You see what I mean? Like, I always say that, and like people that are friends with me, you know, that I've always said I'm really afraid to have sons, because I feel like it's difficult to raise boys to be like really good people, because there's so many like things coming at men, like at school, like in terms of different versions of masculinity coming at them. So you have like the dealers coming at them, you have the fraud boys. I think everything has got to do with I like, you can't sleep, all you have to do is work. And like you have that, like the violent people, you have so many things telling men what it is to be a woman, to be a man. But to be a woman, I don't feel like I get that much. Like when I was really, really young, I don't know if other girls pertain to this, like you could be boisterous and boyish, you could climb trees, you could run around, get all these things that are associated with being boys. If a little boy was running around in like heels and makeup and blah blah, doing things that are traditionally female, everyone. So there definitely is a difference in terms of the way that you raise girls and allow girls to kind of be a little bit, in their youth especially, to be a little bit more free flowing or whatever, and the way that you raise boys. And you might find that with a woman, this is just my perspective, that with a woman, she might either overdo it, like overdo the masculine thing, like, no, you can't do this, you can't play with this, you can't do that. That's for girls, I forgot, that's for girls, that's for girls, just to ensure that boy is somehow masculine. Or she might completely not care at all and raise him like to be overly emotive, to be over emotional, to be like feminine. So I do think it's different, because if you come out with like a boisterous girl, no one really cares. They're just a bit like, oh, okay, you're
So you think you can teach like a man how to be masculine, or you just don't think so?
I feel like
actually I had another question. Actually, do you feel like if a man doesn't lead out in worship, he's less masculine?
That's an interesting point. I personally feel like you're not taking up your responsibility. If it's masculine, basically. If it's not your strength, for example, maybe you're not very good at coming out with lesson plans for your kids. Like when I think of the things that my mum used to do to like for us as children, like my dad was very much in support of it. So he always made sure we did it, sort of thing. So even though it wasn't like him doing everything, it was like, okay, well, in early stages anyway, it was like, okay, well, mum has called family weddings, let's make sure that we come. So there was, even though like there were, like they might also come in my ear and want to talk to me about stuff later on. But like in terms of, even if it's not your actual strength, being very like supportive and also pushing it and like being there for it, and not being like, oh, like you're missing it, or you booked your shift during the time that family worship is usually and stuff like that, so you're not involved. I'm not seeing it as a priority. I feel like we'll see that. And then see it as, oh, it's mummy. If it's more of a partnership, or if you're the one pushing it, I feel like that's very beneficial.
Yeah, because you know what, like even in my family home is like, and I think like the masculinity is kind of a man is very important because even in my family, like let's say we do family worship and stuff like that, and we're going through the prayer, like my dad will be like the last one to bless over all the prayers, like as if it's ingrained in us to like just be that head. I mean, so I think you make a good point there. But yeah, I don't think there's like I don't know, man. It's a difficult topic, and as people have said previously, it's very subjective to what you think. I mean, is masculinity. So, but yeah, no, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm gonna again run through everyone, and I'm gonna refocus us. So everyone, let's try and keep. I'm also like bouncing off people, but let's try and keep things nice and short. So Josephine, please go, or Josie, please go.
Hello. So, I saw that for the question, like it wasn't more focused on like what should masculinity be. I feel like kind of like what in the reality of what it is, and I feel like in whatever culture, like throughout all time, it's always been some sort of strength and like not being reliant on someone. Like you are the like kind of the like strength. I think is always in masculinity. I think when it comes to Christianity, a big part of Christianity is knowing that you are weak and like giving up your all to focus, like to know that someone else is stronger than you and you can completely rely on that person. So I think because that part of Christianity is like is important and also like shown so much because of the way that masculinity has like some sort of strength in it, we kind of get away. Like that might be like why men don't relate to as much. Like they aren't able to just give up their all and like be so vulnerable and rely on God in that way. Like they don't like maybe know that they can contemplate on their emotions so much, which is something that's very important when you're trying to create a relationship with God, like really focusing on your emotions. So maybe that like part of masculinity is what men nowadays are be able to relate to.
Yeah, and I think thank you so much, my lovely little sister right there. She's kind of refocused us a little bit in regards to what in Christianity today challenges what is the traditional man. And thank you for that, because essentially what our main thing was trying to determine, are there challenges? And if there are challenges, is there a way that we can repackage things or focus on certain things in order to allow men to maybe take this message easier, or allow them to also see Christianity from a perspective that is encouraging of strength and is encouraging of all these things. And I feel like we can look at David, for example, right? David killed lion and did like major masculine things, killed a giant, like, do you know what I mean? But then he was also, as you look into his walk, he was very much reliant on God. When he had a problem, no matter what bad thing he did, he would still go to God and be like, yeah, I've really messed up this time. Like, do you know what I mean? And we do see instances of David being really, really weak and not being able to kind of stand up in terms of where his family were running awry and doing all sort of things, but he was still able to find himself coming back to God. And we might read that and look at that and be like, like he was being very vulnerable and he was being very reliant and dependent. But then we could also repackage that in terms of David knew what tools he had in order to reach a certain goal, in order to rebuild strength. It's the way that I feel a lot of it is the way that we actually speak it out. And in terms of the little bit of research I've done, apparently some time ago there was a massive influx of like women in the church, and basically there was this over like feminization of it in terms of to like keep them interested. So like women's ministries were brought up, all of this stuff like kind of came up, and women were kind of like let's focus on them, let's also make them feel included, because there was this whole like kind of doom and gloom version of Christianity. Like if we think back to the Middle Ages, like obviously ages ago, but like in terms of like, it was all about kind of going to hell, being like this, trying to be this perfect person so that you can all like fight, and you can fight all of these demons and all this like evil stuff that's around you in life, and you can be victorious with God, like with God leading you and blah blah. I'm thinking whether there needs to be a little bit of a mixture in those narratives in order to attract both men and women, in terms of this being a sort of a battle, a spiritual battle where you can rebuild your strength and be on your knees and be a prayer warrior for God, like all of that kind of like strong language, instead of like the kind of more flowery, like, oh, like if you just kind of fall down to your knees and humble yourself and lay yourself, like, do you know, all of that kind of stuff that kind of might be seen as more feminine, but it's just my thoughts. Okay, so can we speak to Esther?
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for bringing this topic to be discussed. I just want to say that this is not a very light topic. This is really quite important in our families, in our churches, and in our workplaces. And now I just want to thank the speakers that have gone before. But I just want to make one point. The challenge that we have, it's because we have left God aside, and we are now focusing on the importance of society and culture, on how it looks at men and how it looks at women. That is why we have the greatest challenges in our families. But I just want to say that the greatest culture and the greatest thing that we can ever look at when we are looking at who is the man, who is the woman, is actually God. What does God say about man and woman? Because if we are going to look at our societies and cultures actually changes. Yesterday, maybe one culture was saying this woman shouldn't go to school. But today that culture has changed. This woman should go to school. And I just want to say that if we focused on how God looks at men and women, and we focused on how God values each and every one of us, then we will actually address some of the challenges that we have in our homes and in our churches. But because we're so much emphasizing on culture and what men and women can do, that is why we actually have now many dysfunctional families, many dysfunctional marriages. And I just want to thank you, young people, because you're discussing this, how we can understand who is the man and who is the woman, masculinity. And many a times people just think, for example, if you are a man and you've done something wrong, because your culture, because your society feels that you need to be a man by not actually even asking for forgiveness. But what does God say? God says when you have done something wrong, humble yourself and ask for forgiveness. But if we're going to focus on culture and society, then I think we will continue experiencing the challenges that we're experiencing in our societies, in our families, and in our churches. And just to finish, I want to say that let us focus and emphasize on what God says. And this, we will be able to address some of the challenges we have in our families. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I think focusing on what the Bible says, it's interesting. I read something, and I don't want to misquote it, but it says something about the language used to actually describe like what loving God is. Like there's different words for love used, and one of them was actually more about being like faithful and loyal, in comparison to being like the love that we think about, which is quite like, oh, I love him so much, like very emotive. While like being faithful or being loyal has more to do with like being steadfast and being strong in character, which I feel like the way that we package things and communicate things, like that is a different way to kind of articulate to men what it actually means to like love God. Is it like this like really emotive way of doing things, or is it just like this loyalty and standing true and just being strong in character, like the whole like dare to be a Daniel, like dare to stand alone, like that, all that kind of stuff? That's quite like, okay, like quite strong, do you know what I mean? But anyway, Sunday is the next person to speak. Hello. Okay, I'll skip that and go to William.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to maybe comment on the question of what constitutes masculinity. I felt that maybe it would be important to sort of look at what biology tells us about men, as opposed to what society tells us about what men are like. We know, for example, that in psychology, men are more agreeable than women, and that is why in the marketplace you find that men generally tend to be uh, paid more than women, because there's been this debate about why are men paid more than women. And then some people are suggesting that maybe it's because the world is dominated by men. But if you look at research on the marketplace, you'll find that the marketplace is controlled by women. Women buy more stuff than men. Women buy more clothes than men. Women buy more shoes than men. But it appears that some things that are being sold to women tend to be more expensive than those of men. And part of the reason is that men tend to be more disagreeable. If a man is told to say your pay this month is going to be, before you start the job, your pay is going to be maybe 2,000. A man is likely to challenge that. Women tend to be more agreeable. You tolerate that. And so all I'm trying to say is there are things that are well known in the sciences that are unique to men that are not found in women. And those are some of the things that people say define masculinity. Then the other thing I'd wanted to say is, I think from a biblical point of view, there is absolutely nothing wrong with a man being caring. But when you look at the gentleman from Scandinavia that was talking about the disparity in the data in that part of the world, what has been noticed in places like Sweden is that when women are allowed to be given the same choices as men, more women are refusing to go into engineering. More women are going into caring roles like nursing and medicine and so on. And you'll find that those particular jobs, engineering pays more than nursing. Women care about people, men generally care about things. We are very good at making things. We have terrible personalities. We are less tolerant. Women are more tolerant. And so these are well-known differences between the genders. And it would be a mistake to dismiss them in the name of, oh, different societies have different values. The characters.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Sorry, you. In regards to that women will naturally choose more caring roles and men have terrible personalities and more likely to go to more masculine or engineering roles, or I don't want to necessarily dismiss that, because I think in regards to the way society is now, that's probably 100% the case. But if we look at what's happening now in terms of trying to introduce women to STEM subjects from a young age and encouraging and letting girls know that caring roles aren't necessarily the only thing that you can do. You can do things that will actually have you earning more money and doing more and whatever. That comes from like a nurture perspective. Like men are nurtured to not have to be as caring and be as tolerant. That's my opinion. That like I do think that some that maybe some women are more emotive and more tolerant, and some men are more like cold and mechanical. But I do feel like we may see a change in the next 10 years in regards to how many women are in engineering roles, in IT roles, in doctors, stuff like that.
Should I respond to that?
Sure. Yeah, please.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Some literature, if you look at what's been happening in places like Scandinavia, Norway, and Sweden, the experiment has been going on for the last 20 or so years. Those countries have gone further than countries like the UK or the USA in giving women exactly the same liberties we have. in giving women as the same opportunities men have. So that social experiment has been performed in those countries. That is why a lot of social scientists and psychologists are looking to them to kind of look at the data. And what it does prove is that no matter how much women have been encouraged to go into STEM subjects, women are predominantly still choosing the same old subjects like nursing and so on. And the more opportunity women are given, the more women go in the opposite direction. So if, for example, there was this idea that gender is a social construct and that the reason women earn less is because of, you know, the patriarchy and the oppression of women by men. When you look at Scandinavia, that particular argument has been debunked completely based on the latest data. And so all I'm trying to say, it is not that women don't have the same capacities. If you look at the evidence in universities, women are outperforming men. More of them are graduating with higher degrees than men. Women clearly, based on some data we've seen, are even smarter or equal to men in every sense of the word, even superior because they can multitask. Because some of them go to university with babies and so on. So the issue is not one of ability. The issue is one of some things that make women women are unique to their biology. And to limit them to social constructionism is, I think, in my opinion, a mistake. But it is a mistake that is also not founded on biology, because those differences between men and women are very much rooted in biology. If you look at the data on the biology, the issue of women being agreeable, that one has been established in many psychological studies. If you look at even recent academics that have become popular, like Jordan Peterson, you will see that they speak about these differences. It's controversial, but the science is very sound. Perhaps the last thing I wanted to say is, every time I've heard somebody say that, you know, that is relative or that is dependent on society, there are some values, especially biblical values, and biological values that are true in every society. Because if I'm claiming, for example, that gender is relative, that claim I'm making must be relative true. Because if I'm saying gender is relative, and I'm claiming that certain values are relative, or that there is nothing true in this world and everything is context dependent, and that all values or things are relative, I must also apply that same principle to my claim. Then my viewpoint must be relative too. So if gender is relative, then why is the view that I'm making about gender not relative itself? So it's a difficult place to go into. Basically, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, William, for that. I do want to, I'm going to go through the hands again, and then I'm going to refocus us, as I said before. But if there's anyone's his point that feels like it's already been made, would you mind please putting your hand down? I'll wait for a few seconds to see if any hands go down. Okay, Lois, if you could please.
Sorry, I've lost my thought now.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Okay, so I just had one point I kind of wanted to make. I think, well, actually, it's not one point, but anyway, I think that we kind of drifted away from the question a bit.
Yeah.
When we were talking about masculinity being affected by Christianity, I think one sister said it before, but we have to kind of allow God to kind of define what being a man was. And when I read and when I look at it, for me, I think it was split into three things. It's the ability to take care of the responsibilities he's placed in front of you. You know, he gives him the Garden of Eden and tells him to take care of it. The ability to cover your family, and also just the ability to kind of be submitted to him. I think those three things kind of define or should define your manhood. You know, we were all told how to behave and how to act equally as man and women. So personal attributes aren't really a factor. I think what we're talking about, though, when we talk about being strong and how we're viewing it, is more preference and how the world sees masculinity. Because, you know, what use is it me being extremely strong, going to the gym and doing all that stuff that makes me appear masculine, but I'm irresponsible at home and I can't take care of responsibilities that God's given me? You know, what use is it if I appear to be rich and I look extremely masculine, but I can't cover my family in prayer or be a leader in my own home? I think we're focusing more on what men see or what women see. Sorry, what women think are preferences. You know, you would like your husband to be a certain way, or you're more attracted to men that are or appear masculine. But I think for me, it's that we're talking about things that appear to be masculine, not actually what men are supposed to be. So if we're going back to that original question of whether or not Christianity challenges masculinity, I think it challenges firstly our own views, because masculinity is subjective. I can speak from a point of view where I was raised by a single mother. You know, I think we all know that really it takes men to raise men, and so my view of a man may be different to someone else's view of a man, but that's just from how I was raised or the influences that were around me. But we all have to go back into what God said about being men. If we're not going back into what God says about men, then all of these things that we're talking about being masculine, appearing strong and looking a certain way, they're really of no use to us, because we won't be fulfilling what God has told us to fulfill. And I think those things are what's important. And that was what I really had to say.
No, that's a really, really valid point, and thank you for that, because I feel like you fully have like given your perspective on our question, which is fantastic.
I had one more thing. Sorry, I had one more thing.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I was actually just talking to my mum, and we were saying there was a verse where Paul says that the brethren are supposed to greet each other with a holy kiss. You know, there's a verse that says that, right? That we're supposed to. But if we were to like apply that to today, you know, you don't see that happening in church.
Do you mean like an actual kiss, or like?
The Bible says to greet each other with a holy kiss. Now, whether that's, you know, a kiss on the cheek, you know, and I suppose the culture was different back then.
Yeah. But maybe like the equivalent of that, so like hugging each other and like being.
Yeah, but so this is what I'm saying. So if we actually ended up doing that, you know, how many men? We don't see men doing that because we know that it feel uncomfortable towards each other.
Yeah.
But back then it wasn't an issue, because masculinity for them wasn't defined by how things appeared.
Yeah.
They would just do, and they would be, you know, together in fellowship and things like that. And I think because we've allowed society to define what masculinity is, we've kind of become a bit more suppressed, or, you know, we're scared of how we might appear in front of others. And it goes back to what we said in the beginning. Being a man is also about being vulnerable, you know, but we're kind of told not to be that, because society isn't looking for people like that. So I think as long as we stay away from what society is telling us we should be, or what they're kind of defining men as, and we kind of fall in line with what God is saying we should be, or how we should behave, and what we should be looking for, then I think we'll have a better understanding of what masculinity is.
Cool. There's someone called their name is Galaxy S9. I don't know. And that's going to be the last person that I refer to from the hand at the moment. We will go back in maybe when we have our little 30 minutes at the end, but Galaxy S9, I don't know your name. You put your name there. Okay.
Hello.
Oh, hi.
Am I Galaxy S9?
Hi, yeah, I think you are.
I figured I didn't take the time to actually put my name. It's really terrible. I just joined a few minutes ago.
Okay.
My name is actually Roy, so you can always refer to me. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Roy.
I just caught the last part of the last speaker. Also, actually, I picked up on something that William said. I'm not sure if William's still on the call.
Yeah, yes.
I think I was nudged to come on because I typically have opinions about various things as it relates to this sort of conversation. It's a good one. From just for overall wise, I'm just going to look at it from.
Sorry, I think you cut out there very, very.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So just in terms of just the overall sort of look at, you know, Christianity and masculinity. There's, you know, I've heard quite a few conversations around the psychology of things and how God wants us to be defined in terms of our masculinity. But ultimately, I feel like the larger question that I thought the conversation was going to be around was in terms of the relationship of men to the church itself.
100%, yeah, and we definitely will head back that way.
Yeah. So, and I like what William said, because sometimes looking at it psychologically, which is something I actually have a background in, and I'm going to address that. But ultimately, I believe the way the church is normally, the way it's meant to run, is that people come to church for different reasons, and we all know that. You know, the church itself, the leadership is usually men. Most churches, the leadership are usually men. Men come to church, join churches because for two major reasons. Sometimes it's just the power, the hierarchy, the prestige that comes with you working in church or being in an office in church. And the second reason is usually if you're a single man, then you're there for women, right? For women, on the other hand, the similar sort of similar interests. And then, you know, they tend to be in a place where, you know, in the choir or around the usher and the sort of roles. Now, in terms of masculine, you know, the way the church and, you know, the relationship of men to church, I'd say more women tend to be in churches because they are just more disciplined. In my experience, I just feel like they, you know, there's the women are most likely going to commit to routines. So if it's in terms of just that choir or that prayer meeting or just those kind of things, whereas men are a bit not as disciplined, so they attend the drop off, so they're not as dedicated as women. I think that probably would be in terms of masculine. I don't think personally that there's any specific thing that the church has, you know, in terms of against men or how it affects them masculine wise. I think men can still be men anywhere they go. Obviously, if there's an instinct that doesn't go with the Bible, then you can't be like that. But it's not something that the church particularly has targeting men for. I just feel like it's a natural order of things. You know, people tend to just come to church for the reasons, and there are more women in church as well, just because of the fact that they're dedicated. That's it. But just to go to what William said about psychology, it's actually true that, you know, the psychology, you know, because we're trying to define what masculinity really is. You know, obviously there are different things that men are in terms of what their psychology can allow them to behave as, but I don't think particularly that, you know, men are more agreeable than women. I think every personality is different, so you can't be absolutely sure on group people or put them in a box and say, okay, perhaps this reason why they've done well in this way or not. I think sometimes, especially when it comes to financial or stock market, men tend to have been in that field for a longer time, so they're more comfortable. I'm not sure about that. Even that statement, I could take that back. I can't be absolutely sure that they are more comfortable, but they're just more in that area. So if they're more of your gender in an area, you tend to be more just comfortable because, you know, a lot of the guys are doing well there, so you're comfortable in that way. So I'm, you know, so that's just it from, you know, I'm not taking much notes down, but I'll just leave it there for a minute.
Thank you so much for that. I just want to kind of focus us on men and the church, right? And what's actually going on in our churches, and whether what's going on in our churches is pushing men out the door or it just isn't as attractive to men. So I'm going to, like I told you guys earlier, that I did a little bit of research. So I just want to read something to you and we can kind of explore that. Okay, so this is part of an article around the feminization of the church. Okay, so men's ministries, a church's lowest priority. Another example of feminization is a lack of ministries for men. Women have Bible studies, prayer groups, support groups, teas, retreats, and of course, children have a plethora of programs. But some churches offer only an annual retreat for men. Yet this is the opposite of the way Jesus did ministry. According to Monroe, and Monroe has basically written a book around the feminization of the church. He said Jesus focused on men, knowing that women and children would follow. According to an oft-quoted statistic from Promise Keepers, when a mother comes to faith in Christ, her family follows 34% of the time. But when a father comes to faith, his family follows 93% of the time. It's very seldom that you have a man in church whose wife is staying at home, said Dr. Eric Theonos, a theology professor at Biola and a teaching elder at Grace Evangelical Free Church. So what will it take to get men into church? They need to see a greater purpose, their role in advancing the kingdom of God according to earth. The gospel that Jesus and Paul preached is revolutionary and is worth giving your life to. But part of the reason guys aren't involved in this is that we've sold to them a milesque toast gospel. We don't paint it as big enough or God as awesome enough or to be impelling. Instead, the church often leaves the impression that once people get saved, their role is to buy time until they enter heaven. What are like people's thoughts around this? I thought it was very interesting in terms of like what we provide to the church, to men, the kind of message we give to men, and the way that we kind of can improve things or do things differently in order to attract more men and keep men in the church. Thomas had his hand up first, so I'll go to him, from what I could see anyway.
I wouldn't put too much stock in that statistic. When women come to the faith, only 34% come. When men come to the faith, 90% come, or the family, 90% of the time the family come. Because in my experience and in my observation,
Thomas, I don't know what it is, but okay, that's better.
Sorry. Somebody else answer whilst I fix this.
Okay, who wants to go? I saw Alex's hand up before. Do you still want to speak?
Sorry, I'll fix my situation at the moment. So I think if you look at in my experience, a lot of the times when a man comes to faith, he compels his family to come, which I don't think is a healthy way of them coming. Because if you haven't convinced your family to come on the basis of the merits of this new decision that you're trying to take them on, I still think there's a bit of a tinge of toxic masculinity there where you're like, well, I have decided to become a Christian, therefore, or I have decided to become whatever religion, therefore all of you are now coming along whether you like it or not. There's a hint of that in there somewhere. So I wouldn't necessarily take away from that the 90% of the time that his godly influence just touches the hearts of everybody and everybody suddenly wants to be baptized. I don't think that's what's going on. But at the heart of how masculinity and church are interplaying, in my opinion, is a question of responsibility, as somebody has previously said. A lot of the times, the reason why it was left to women or mothers and grandmas to bring kids to church is because men absconded from the family and weren't meeting their responsibilities in the family to begin with. And if they're not in their families, then they're not going to be at church. It follows rationally that that's probably what's going to happen. And so if you consider the fact that 90% of single parents are women, then it's rational again to assume that kind of disparity also appears in church, which means when there is no man in the house, there is then not going to be a man representing that family in the church, which means then there's going to be more women as a natural result of that in church. And I think the overall pattern is that when men abscond from the family, they abscond from church. And when men are not meeting their responsibilities to their family, they are not then meeting their responsibilities to anything that requires a great deal of responsibility and altruism, because those are the qualities that you have to exercise in your family. And so I think it's quite insightful maybe to have a look at what men have been doing in their families over time in our culture to then inform what's happening with men in church. So I don't think church is inherently pushing men out. I think to some degree men are just not stepping up to the plate in the same way that they haven't stepped up to the plate in many other environments. We talk about women's departments shooting up and men aren't really leading other departments. I mean, every man and his dog is setting up a Forex network on Instagram at the moment. If you can go and set up a fraud Forex on Instagram, you can come to church and set up a department. So the question is not about, oh, we don't have an environment that is conducive to men. I know we began on a bit of a jokey banter level earlier about the songs in church, but really at the heart of it, I think we just have less men who are prepared to be responsible and altruistic and do things that don't necessarily benefit them immediately and for other people. And I think that can be seen by how they behave in the family.
Okay, cool. I do think that I personally, and again, if anyone wants to interject, do you think there is definitely a mixture of reasons? Like, even if I think about it, like in terms of men's ministry at Reading, if we talk about Reading West, for example, right? Reading West Church, my home church, a lot of people's home church in this, they've always tried with men's ministries here and there. They've had their boys' night out. They've had their little conversation here and there. But in terms of actually it being driven, and the men's ministry actually having influence on what happens in the church in general, that isn't really happening. I do feel like there needs to be like a filtration of like, what do men need to hear? What needs to encourage them? What kind of language can we use that is more male friendly? Because it is strange how many articles and how much research has been done around the feminization of the church, and like just the language we use and the way that we put across certain messages. And I'm just kind of wondering, is there anything that the church can do to bring in more men? Or do we just have to be like, oh, well, men don't want to do these things for themselves. They don't want to, like, they're not responsible, like in the way that Thomas was saying. And I do think that is part of it. They don't want to do these things, so that we basically can't do anything about it. But is there sort of middle ground where we can sort of meet halfway? Is anyone?
Sorry, can I just quickly respond to that, because I stated a problem. Let me just quickly give a solution in my view, just to answer you. I think it's a wrong use of energy trying to get people to come into church. The church should be going out into society in order to have a greater influence with how a man or family or responsibility to family is seen out in society. If we're not influencing the society, then we can't come and influence the church. It's like finding a tree that's not growing any fruits and trying to sellotape fruits onto the tree instead of dealing with why there's no water getting to the trunk and why there's no nutrition getting to the tree. Once you address the tree, then the fruits will come. And I think the tree is the society. We're in society that's running away from their responsibilities, and we're trying to make them responsible in church. It's the wrong way around. I think if we don't have any influence in the society around us, then we can't address this issue.
Okay. No, yeah, that's also a very good point.
Can I come in?
Yeah. Who's speaking?
Hope Physiotherapy Clinic.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to comment about this. I just think that somehow, the points that you have raised there are very important. It's a very complex problem of many centuries, that unfortunately has been sort of growing quietly, and no one was paying much attention to it, simply because the men who are in the church are experiencing power. They are the pew party. Largely the women they are the pulpit party, and the women are generally the pew party. So as far as how church has been designed over the years, it's just been design programs, and even the language you're talking about is all geared to the majority audience, which in this case is women, and men themselves have not focused on evangelizing to men. It's only now, actually, if we talk about the Adventist Church, it's only now that the Adventist Church is waking up to this, to say, well, actually, there's a problem here. We have a doctrine that says our girls must marry within the church. Actually, there are not enough boys going around. So there's a problem. But when it comes to evangelism that you were talking about, how can we reach men? I think we need to start off at a point where we are actually intentional and we are serious about it, in terms of how we are putting money in the right places. Men's ministries, fully funded in the church as a department. If it's there, in many congregations, it's actually it's not functional. Why? Because the few men that are there are busy focusing on reaching out to women and children and young people. That's their focus. They are not focusing on reaching other men.
Right.
Women that would come into the church, they will find a strongly feminine environment, and that is a fact. We cannot run away from it, even if we want to find other explanations. It's just a purely feminine environment. Some things that actually make men tick, they are taboo within the church. You can't speak like that. You can't do things like that because they somehow, even though they may be in the Bible, they actually have been seen, rather belittled. They are not important. Some attributes that would define a man in any regard. So men have chosen other places to go. Football stadiums, full up with men largely. Those places naturally attract men. The church is just not doing that.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello? Is anyone going to speak? I was going to say, at sporting events, let me put my camera on. At sporting events, there's usually a sort of a camaraderie around this big goal or this team that that has history and has maybe, well, hopefully good history for some teams, and there's a sense of purpose. You want your team to be the top of the heap and to be the conquering team. So I think there is some substance to the quote you read earlier, where we basically kind of lost the plot of what the Christianity, the goal of Christianity is, which is to obviously better the world through the message of Jesus Christ. And because of that, it just has become watered down to a set of rituals, a club where you come and you do certain weird rituals and sing songs, but you're not doing anything really with it.
Yeah, I think that's what's like major in terms of actively, and Tom said this as well about like going into the community, doing stuff. Like in terms of like the church now, I feel like it's very, we come to church every week, we sit, we have a little chat with our friends. And even like in that same article, it spoke about the church being a bit of a ladies' club. Like all the women come together, they see their friends that they haven't seen all week, they gossip a bit, they have a bit of a conversation. And the men are just kind of scattered with their wives and families. They're not really talking. They're kind of just there until they get to leave. And then you have people that are like in positions of leadership. So for example, the person that facilitates the building, the deacons, the elders, they'll be around because they have stuff to do. And like, but in terms of like the actual active, what we actually say to like guys, like, do we have that? Do we actually have that thing that's like, this for men? If anything, women, for example, want support. We want to have, like, we use the church as like a place to come and like share our problems and like find other people to help us pray and stuff like that. How do we actively create an environment where men feel like this is a place of purpose? When I come here, I achieve something. Because from what we can see of men, that's what they want to do in most things. Like Thomas was saying that if they come and build, like they'll have like a Forex page, they'll do this, do that. They're making money that way. There's a purpose, a reason. Men might not see the same benefit of coming to a space where I now pour out my heart to all of these people that maybe I don't know that well. Like they might not see the impact of that until they build a community, which my main thing is, I think the men's ministries really needs to be built. And like I feel like my dad has also said to me like, oh, we want to help, and I've always kind of been very dismissive of that and been like, oh, I don't see why women need to help with that. But maybe we do need to be like, okay, let's like help our men and give them the similar tools that we have, let them adapt them to be a little bit more like masculine and attract more men, so that they're able to have this society and community where they can come together and do things in a way that is a little bit more fine-tuned to them and communicate to each other in a way that's more fine-tuned to men than what it has been the kind of overarching thing, which is a very kind of feminized, fluttery, almost what atheists would call like a comfort blanket of Christianity for people. And for women, that feels great, like our comfort blanket. Oh, Jesus, he loves us so much, he holds us at night, all that kind of stuff. That's different to the kind of relationship that men might want to have with God. Just see what I'm saying.
I was going to add in that if we look back just at our church in general, if we look back at how our population of young boys or young men has changed, there was a time where we were thriving and we had a lot of guys in our church.
Yeah.
And I remember girls would come to our church because a lot of guys. And if I look at some of the things that we were doing then, I would say mainly it was because the guys who were attending regularly, they were all really close and they had some sort of brotherhood and they had some friendship, and it went beyond just church. So we had the distinct few who were part of the choir, and then they brought in some others, and then when they decided, oh, actually choir is not appropriate for us, they still had other things and they were meeting up outside of church and doing football and doing all these things. So I feel like one of the practical ways we can support men's ministries is we can help them to put on these kind of events and activities that encourage men to be just to create those bonds and become more brotherly and have those ties. But it would be interesting to hear what men think would be the more practical, like really, really practical, like give us not an A to Z guide, but literally like, okay, so we should have more football sessions. We should have more this, like break it down to that kind of level, because I feel like a lot of the times we go around and say, yeah, we need to focus on the men, but how do we focus on the men?
100.
You know what? I agree with what they're all saying, because I feel like when we think about the church, we limit it to the four walls, right? But we don't think about going outside when people leave. So we're just focused in our little areas, but we don't reach out to men when they leave. Do you understand? I think, like Cheryl said, one of the most practical ways to meet people is to put on events that are for them. So like men, for example, we like football. Do you know what I mean? We like sports, for example. So it's about finding ways to create ministries to attract the type of people that we want to get. You see where I'm coming from? Men like food, for example. So why not create like a food ministry where we can all come together, share, sit down, talk. You understand? Create a safe environment where brothers can reach brothers and where men can actually talk on a level. If we want to learn how to make money, let's invite people to come in and teach us to make money. You see what I'm saying? But use it in a ministerial way. Use that as an opportunity. See, all we need to do is plant the seed, right? Because seed as small as a mustard seed, faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains. We just plant the seed. Everything else will germinate from that. So it's all about just finding a way to find out, what do men of our society like? Okay, cool. Let's find out how we can reach them at their need there and then. So that's what I'll say from that.
Jump in.
Can I just say something? Please, can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, I say this with all the respect in the world, so men don't come at me. But I feel like men in our church maybe need to take a little bit more responsibility for the young men, because me as a woman, I'm a youth leader at my church. I've got a lot of girls and a few boys, and I can't have this.
Oh no, you're on mute. Okay, no, you're fine now.
Connect with them. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yeah, I can't connect with the guys the same way that I can, and I find that sometimes there's a thin line. Men sometimes in our churches want to be spoon-fed everything. I'll give an example. In my local church, if you say women come have a meeting, bring lunch, women will do that. But if you say to the men come have your meeting, bring lunch, they'll come with their hands bare, like they can't cook. So I'm like, so you want us to organize meetings, cook the food for you, feed you the food? Like I feel like we has to be men. You please do something for our boys, because we can help you, but we can't have the conversations we can, with the boys that you can. So and also I think men you men that are still in church, you have to be an example for the boys, because the boys are not good. They're not playing. They can't see you acting differently or acting some type of way at home, and then come to church with your tie on and you're good, and then you expect them to stay in church. So I just think men need to step up a little bit for our young men, upcoming young men.
See, I agree with that.
Hello?
My only question then would be, we can say as much as we want to say, men step up, men step up, men step up. if they don't step up, are we then just going to leave the situation as it is, and then it continues to get worse and worse and worse? So what are the practical things that can still be put in place? So if for example, the man, like, does it mean that when we say everyone bring food, women, we have to step back and say, actually, I'm not doing it today, you're doing it, like, as a wife, make the husband do it? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do we...
Cheryl.
Can I just very quickly refer to the hands? Oh, sorry, so sorry. Josie?
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, I'm actually here sitting with Josie. I just wanted to say something a little bit, maybe to just shake things up a little bit. I've been a men's ministry leader for a while, and I've experienced some of the issues that some of you are just discussing. I think we struggle to be able to be supportive to each other, to be able to come together and deal with some of the issues that we face as men. And it's an ongoing struggle. So the only thing I could say is that maybe women's forums or women's ministry who are, I believe, stronger should take it as a ministry to outreach and support us, the men, to be able to come back alive. Because I think, I don't know, I'm not trying to defend, but it might be that maybe the devil has really targeted us men and we are struggling. But whatever the reason is, we are struggling. And one point which I just wanted to make, as I said, I just wanted to shake things up a little bit, was in answer to the question of does the church challenge men, or masculinity, I'm thinking that the church challenges men because they are not prepared to keep the high standards of discipline, of virtue, and of spiritual leadership that the Bible expects of them. And maybe it is because of that guilt that drives men away. What do we think?
Discuss. What do people think?
Well,
Sorry, say it again.
what I'm trying to say, respond to what Alex was saying, in terms of like men. I agree with Alex that that's a point, but I think that is not the solution, because if we really think about it, we've done this for years and years. Doing football tournament is not going to be something new. Doing FIFA tournament is something new. Like, getting men to come together and socialize is not, men can always do this. We do this. Even non-believing men do this.
I agree.
And do this everywhere. Meeting is not the problem. What I've seen to be something that can be influential is, what are we doing when we're meeting? If we're meeting to play and socialize, loads of us, like, let's even consider a practical example, right? Reading West Football Club. There's loads of FBA. There's loads of them who are not. A lot of them will not still turn up to church, but yet they play football every single week. So what I'm trying to say is that, guys, what I've seen is this: if we are meeting and we are literally, for those of us who are still in church, are actually trying to find practical ways and practical solutions from the Bible to help men in their walk and the main things that they're actually struggling with, like the actual proper problem. Because men not cooking and men not coming is like the surface issue, but there's a real reason why they're not coming. So let's say Andrew Fuller is even talking about hood lessons right now, and loads of guys turn up to that thing, like, you're probably mostly non-believers than believers, and it's like it's a ministry that's tackling an actual issue that men are actually experiencing. So if people come to church, and let's assume loads of guys are talking about, loads of guys are having problems in a specific area, but they feel as if church does never address it, and it's a very surface problem, surface solution. Over time, maybe you feel like, what is the point of being here? I just come, I sing, and then I go home. But really, what is not really being addressed. So it's like, I feel as if men, those of us who are in church, when we socialize, we need to make a point. First of all, we need to know God for ourselves. If we know God for ourselves, we have to use the Bible to fix general proper problems, and we're meeting people's actual needs, and we know how to link it with other men. So like when we socialize, we also share solutions to problems. Maybe people could see the value of coming back because it's like the Bible is made real to them and like the church environment is made real to them. I think that's just maybe a thought. It's not the whole solution, but that's something which I've seen.
Mm-hmm. And I think like an interesting kind of mix between both of what has just been said is if we're able to like identify where problems actually lie. So like my dad was just saying that there might be things that men are struggling with that the church pushes men to be, which we've discussed today, and we don't actually give them the tools as to how they're actually supposed to do these things. I think we speak so much to women about what it is to be a woman, about how to be a good wife, how to know that you have value, how to like all this kind of like self-love, like all this stuff. Like even in terms of like when we were younger, we used to have this thing called like girls' night in, and the guys they went and played games and stuff, but we literally had like lectures on hygiene, how to like look after yourself, how to deal with certain things. We had all of our aunties talk about like dealing with conflict between the two of like girls and all sorts of things that we spoke about. Some of it like some was more beneficial than others. Like personally, I don't like the rose analogy when it comes to someone's virginity. Don't really like it, but like there's loads of like different things that we were like kind of pushed and fed that dealt with like our general issues. And I'm just kind of wondering if the church does that for men. Can I just go to Jay?
Oh,
sorry, I'm looking at the hands that are up. Can I just go to Jay? Okay, no. William?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought I'd comment on what can be done, and I think the gentleman that spoke about the football issue, I think football won't keep men in church. It'll be just like a club. They'll go and play. Once they're done, they'll go to their respective homes, and won't have any connection or affinity to the church. So I think one issue that should be of primary focus is teaching men to love God. I think that is a very important thing, because people that love God are people that will see the point in going to church, because it's the only reason somebody ever goes to church, to have a relationship with God, to nurture that relationship and to grow in their walk with God. And so unless men are taught that from the very beginning, the value and how to really nurture their relationship with God and to love God, because it's the only reason somebody ever goes to church, to have.
Hello? Okay.
Hello?
Carry on.
Should I continue?
Yes, please continue.
Yeah, so I think primary focus must be on making sure that men have a personal relationship with Christ, because it is that will make them come to church.
Then can I just stop you there then really quickly? If that's the thing, how do we ensure that? Because personally, I do feel like women come to church for different reasons. Not all of it is because they have a relationship with God. Some of it is you are trying to build a relationship with God. Like there have been times where my relationship with God has not been there at all. I still went to church every week. Like there was different reasons. And I feel like some of it is routine. I'm just used to doing it. I like doing it. I go there. There's all my aunties there. All my friends are there. Like it's just fun. Like from time to time. I'm wondering, is that what guys experience? Do they come to church and they're like, even if they're not spiritually up, there's other things there that like I'm just gonna go anyway.
I think there are. I think this is really going to sound controversial, but I hope it is not as controversial as it sounds. So I strongly believe that there are ways in which men are that women are not. Women, if you meet their emotional needs, by and large, women are happy. A man's emotional needs can be met and he can still be miserable, because men need a purpose in life. If you don't give men something that makes them feel useful, something that gives them purpose, then you will have problems with them. That is why women who have stay-at-home dads have always had issues. You just look it up in the community. Stay-at-home dads just don't, it is a solution for the short term, but it is a very suboptimal solution, because men, when they feel useless, you get issues. And so and so I think men need to be made to feel useful. And I think finding things within the church that allow them to participate, to feel like they're contributing, to feel like that they're growing also in their skills, in their knowledge, as well as allowing them to see the results, the benefits, or the good that they are doing as a consequence of what they're doing. So that
I think that right there is major.
Yeah.
Like what you said right there about creating or providing content that essentially is so practical for their lives that they're able to use it practically and see active improvements in their life is probably the big thing here.
Yeah.
So like, if we put all of these programs on and they're all like, okay, let's talk about, I don't know, let's talk about forgiveness, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking like very flowery around the verses but that tell you that you should forgive, blah blah. But we're not giving practical solutions as to how you can forgive and what those things, what benefits you will see. It's very likely that for a man listening to that, he's gonna be like, I've wasted 40 minutes of my time.
Yeah. And the this other thing I think is also important. I think the issue of language as well in the church. If you look at how men are responding, especially in modern times, especially millennial men and maybe baby boomers as well. If you look at how they're responding, especially part of the reason why even in the political sphere we've had Boris and we've had Trump is it's largely, if you look at especially in the Americas, it's largely because men feel like they're being oppressed because of political correctness and, this issue of toxic masculinity. I think the church should move away from all this postmodern talk of toxic masculinity. I believe there's sinful behavior and there's godly behavior. Toxic masculinity, I don't know what that is. Is either somebody's behaving in a manner that is godly or he's not. And I think we must allow men to be men without making them feel that there's something wrong with being a man.
I think the issues arise in terms of how do I phrase this? I feel like issues arise in terms of, does that supposed masculinity hurt people? Because there's a reason why there's been like this massive backlash, and I feel like Adriel said this earlier, that there has been an abuse of power. And now we're at like a complete, like, well, maybe not a complete turnaround, but like saying, for example, the reason that like Trump and people are being put in is because men feel oppressed. He is like somebody that has like assaulted women. So like that's like like do men now not want to be brought up for assaulting women? Like, I don't know. I feel like we need to find a balance 100%. And like there's something that this is very personal to me, but maybe some other women also relate and some guys also relate. Me being a feminist sometimes means that my mentality towards men can be very jaded at times. And sometimes and it's something that as I grow up and grow within my feminism and learn about first generation feminism in the past feminism, I'm trying to adjust and be a little bit more open, because I now understand that the only way that we're ever going to be like on the same level is if we work together. Like this massive backlash is not going to bring us anywhere, because you now have radical feminists, which are just basically misandrists that hate men, and that's not bringing us anywhere. In terms of our actual churches, I don't know if that's a problem, considering that most like Christian women are like anti-feminist anyway. So in terms of that, I don't actually know if that's the issue, but in terms of the practicalities and providing men with practical ways of learning things in life, and like coming to church and feeling like, okay, I have learned something today that I'm going to be able to actually like put into my life and use as a practical tool. I feel like if we start speaking like that, and we speak in a way that's maybe a little bit less, because as much as men are supposed to be emotional and in touch with their emotions, they are also less emotional than women, and that is a generalization, but for most men that is the case. The way that they relate to things is different to us. So if we're always talking about crying and dropping to your knees and being like overly dramatic in terms of the way that you express your feelings and love for God, and instead of saying, oh, the way that you love God is through like utter devotion, and if you say that's got more loyalty and strength in character, those sort of things are more likely to pertain to certain to men. In terms of like, again, if someone wants to disagree with me, let me know. Then like the way that we now communicate Christianity.
Yeah, I agree with you. Perhaps the only thing I would sort of have issue with is the issue of language, especially in the church. I think men are when men don't respond very well because men are proud creatures. I think people forget that. No one has ever had a good day who's tempered with a man's pride, no matter how small. And so every time you find people do things or say things that make men feel a little bit less than men, it can be an issue. It is not a big issue in the church, but it is certainly an issue. An issue because certain words have gotten into the church, and because they're in the vocabulary of people in the church, then negatively impact men. Perhaps maybe the final thing I would want to say is in terms of how men are allowed to participate in the church, allowing men to develop their own spiritual lives, I think, is also important, because what that does basically is that men that know God are more likely to bring other men to God. They are more likely to be exemplary in their conduct. Then they're also more likely to love and forgive and build relationships with their friends. We've been talking about the issue of men having friendships. There is a tendency in the church. Men sometimes don't bother so much about their fellow men, but there is a scripture, I think it's in the book of Matthew, which says.
Can I just very quickly, William?
Yeah.
A little bit cautious of time, and that there's other people.
Please, yeah.
As well.
Yeah. Did you want me to finish, or you wanted me to?
If you can wrap it up.
Yeah, very quickly. There's that scripture which says that I think it was Christ saying in the book of Matthew about how it is that certain people only care about people that care about them, and people only care about people that love them. And he says you're not different from the publicans. And so I think men that know God are more likely to develop relationships with other men, which will in the end benefit the church. And the final thing, I suppose, is also when a man has done well, whether it is in their professional, personal, family life, the church must be able to validate that. Let other men see that this guy is doing well, because men love that. And if men come to church and it just becomes this competition where they all have issues, and whatever little achievements they've had are not validated, you get issues with them as well. I think men, when they've done something well in the church, whether he's a good dad or he's been, with his wife for 50 years, I think it is always important to uphold those virtues so that other young men can have somebody to look up to and aspire to certain things. And especially because a lot of women have, a lot of people are coming from single parent homes.
Thank you for that so much.
Sure. Thank you.
Can I have E speak, please?
Hi.
Hi.
So what I wanted to say was that, hi, hello everyone, hope you're having a wonderful day. What I wanted to say was that I think the reason why we can't expect men who are in the church right now to go after the young people who are leaving the church is because they've spent a vast majority of their time in leadership or as pastors or as whatever, pretending that they're perfect. So when young boys are struggling with different things, they go to church, they see a perfect man, or they see people pretending to be perfect. So they're like, why am I coming here when there's nothing practical there for me? I feel like if people who were in leadership or are in leadership now were more expressive about their struggles and what they faced as young men growing up, they would give more guidance to the younger people. And that way they would feel like there's something at church for me, because church can show me how I can solve this particular issue I'm having in my life. And I feel like pastors or people like Andrew Fuller, who speak about the times they were in the trenches and the times that they were pastors and they were still struggling with these things that they're going through their lives, things like that help, because they show that these people are human. These people do still struggle with certain things, but there's a way out. So I think that plays a major factor.
No, that's amazing. I feel like that's like a major takeaway for a lot of the men on here that are in leadership positions in our churches to take on board, that our younger boys need to know where you have come from and how you are where you are today. And if you are still struggling, let them also know. So like we've just had two like opposing points that but will kind of work together in terms of congratulating men for when they are doing well and they are spiritually doing what they should be doing, but also having that communication of like, I also went through this, yet I'm still here. I also have struggled with lust, I have struggled with money management, I have struggled with being able to be dominant and all sorts of things that a lot of different men of our boys will be able to relate to. And I feel like having that open communication would be great. I just want to let us all know that we have overrun by 24 minutes. And I believe, can someone let me know whether there's a service after this?
No, you can continue until you are tired.
We can keep talking till we're tired, but I want to let people go if they want to go. But like, I just want to kind of collate some of the things that we've spoken about today, just to kind of come to a conclusion before we kind of have a little bit of a chin wag ourselves. And if anyone wants to stay on and talk, we can. In terms of solutions,
he already had everyone on before he was. So for us to
sorry, I don't know if that person was trying to speak. If you were, can you like message me and just let me know they were actually trying to talk for us there. In terms of our actual conclusion, it's been interesting that we've kind of gone down a path where we need to be more conscious of what we do for men within our churches, and the men in our churches need to take some sort of stand when it comes to that. One thing that was in our YouTube comments was that men don't have enough mentors. And I feel like that's a conclusion that we've come to today, really, that there needs to be sort of that, those visuals of men doing things. We need to allow them to be able to be masculine and be themselves within that space as well. There's a lot of different contributing factors. I think that's one thing that we can definitely all agree on, that there's lots of different things that have kind of contributed to this. But I feel like if we're able, as churches and as church leaders and as church members and people that are kind of just being introduced to the faith, or anyone that's here, like just having an understanding that the church is for everyone. And there are different messages that everyone can take on board. For some people, that kind of like really emotive, beautiful and loving story of like Christ being our husband and the world being our bride is the most effective way to get to them. Another way to communicate that is Christ is going to hold you to a certain standard, and you can achieve this if you are able to kind of get down on your knees, read your Bible, pray, have that relationship with God, and essentially reach a certain goal. For other people, it's going to be kind of constructive things. How can we actually bring in certain tools? How can we teach you certain things? How can we teach you how to deal with your loving story? husband and the world being our bride is the most effective way to get to them. Another way to communicate. I like hearing, like, I don't know what's happening. And in terms of being able to essentially, I've lost my train of thought, being able to essentially have a space where men can effectively learn different things and take these active tools, because those are things that we understand of men in general. We know that they want practical things. They don't want to waste 40 minutes of their time having a conversation that led to nowhere, or kind of like just giving them a little bit of a fluff. Okay, that's nice, but in the end, what am I learning? How is this contributing to my life, sort of thing. Also, in terms of one thing that I'm also wondering from like a young boy's perspective, how do we make, and this is just something to kind of think about and take away, how do we make the church space a space that is, I don't know if this is the right word to use, but like cool, and like somewhere where people want to bring their friends and they can bring their boys, and it's not like this really kind of embarrassing thing for them. How do we do that? How do we approach that? And like, to be honest, I think we might have opened up a conversation that, and we can go down several different veins, but I'm hoping that everyone has sort of taken something away from this, and especially our church leaders that are on here. I hope that you have taken certain things away from this that you can use as objective points to sort of actually improve our church environment, so that the young men in our church actually feel like this is a space where they can grow and bring other people and basically thrive in. So thank you very much, guys. I'm gonna pray to close, and then we can kind of, if anyone wants to stay, we can continue, if so be it, okay? Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you so much for giving us the technology and the opportunity to have conversations like this. Oftentimes, we're not quite sure how things are gonna be responded to, but this has been an excellent response. We've had, I don't know how many people, but definitely over 100 people listening. And I thank you, God, for allowing there to be such a place where we can reach so many people and have these really important conversations. Lord, I hope and pray that every single person here has taken something useful away from this. And if they still have questions, let them know that there's people to talk to. There are different forums, there's different ways that we can communicate. And our team and everyone here is happy to have those conversations so we can build and grow and create an environment where men and women are able to have access to you, but build a relationship with you and eventually join you in heaven. Lord, I say this prayer in nobody else's name, but in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much, guys.